Anybody who's been following me for a while knows I love to cut joinery, and I've done a lot of it. And for 20 years or so, I've been a finish carpenter, a woodworker, and I've been really into carpentry. And I've used a lot of coping saws during that time, and the general consensus is they suck. They have a lot of features that they lack. There's lots of different types of saws. There's these cheapies, which are tensioned by hopes and dreams, and that's like the one thing a coping saw should do, is hold really good tension, because that's the only way to get a good cut. Of course, that was a problem that New Concept solved many years ago with both their fret and coping saw. I've made frame saws. This is sort of like a really old kind of tech that they used for panel saws and frame saws, and it works pretty good. You can get decent tension with these, but I think as a whole, this is one tool that has seen very little advancement over the years and has a lot to be desired, which is why 2 years ago I reached out to my friends at Hong Dui and said, you know what our next collaborative tool should be? A coping saw. And that's why today I'm so excited to announce the KM-19, which is a combination coping fret saw and has a bunch of new features that none of these coping saws have. So come on into the bench, let me show you what these can do and tell you about some of the development hurdles that we had to get over. All right, let's talk about design choices and the hurdles we had to overcome, and then we'll talk about some uses of coping saws, and I'll give you some tips and tricks on how to use them. But first, I want to define what is a fret saw and what is a coping saw. A fret saw typically has a wire blade. The blades are smaller, which makes it a lot easier to make really, really tight curves. These are used a lot by jewelers, and there's like metal cutting and diamond cutting blades. You can buy those in rolls and cut them to length. Coping saws have usually bigger teeth, and they're designed for more waste removal, usually cutting in wood. You can actually get some cool metal cutting blades for them and some other applications, but in general, they're a woodworking saw with a wider blade. If you think about a bandsaw, you've got a resaw blade or like a fine circle cutting blade, and the resaw blade is much wider, the circle cutting blade is much smaller. It's very much the difference between fret and coping saws. That was a big requirement for me, is I want us to have both attachment mechanisms. So what's really cool that we came up with is you have the ability to change out from a wire style blade holder to a hook style coping style blade holder. It's a really cool way to do it, and tension is really easy to do on our saws, which is the most important factor of a saw. These guys, it's like cutting with a wet noodle. They really are not even worth the $16 you can buy them at Home Depot for. Of course, New Concepts has been the standard for many years of a great coping saw, and really the only choice on the market. They use a 6061 aluminum, which is great for engineering and building applications, but we wanted to be as strong as possible because we wanted tension to be really, really tight. So we went with 7075 aluminum, which is typically used in aerospace and military grade applications, and we can get really, really, really tight tension. Our tensioning mechanism is actually really cool. You simply tension the saw by loosening and tightening this with your hand here. You don't have to do any cam levers or anything like that. It's just boop, and it's tight. The handle is reversible. So for you Western style folks, you can cut on the push stroke, or you Japanese style folks, you can switch it around and just cut on the pull stroke. It's a really great way to use the saw. Of course, you can do that with any coping saw, but you have to change the blade, and that's not always easy. In fact, a few years ago, I built what could be called a frame coping saw or a frame saw, which is very old technology. This goes all the way back to the Roubeau days, where they made saws and they tensioned them using a rope. It's a great saw, works good. You can't really get quite the same amount of tension as you can with the New Concepts or our saw, but they do work. And then, it's a fun build, but it's a pain in the ass to change the blade. Changing the blades on these is real simple. You can just twist the handle and loosen the tension, and then out pops the blade and you can change it. It's really, really fast and really, really easy way to do it. Another part about tensioning that is really important is the structure. We went with a 3-piece mortise and tenon design, which with the 7075 aluminum makes this thing so rigid, which was just an absolute requirement for product development. It had to be stiff as can be. These saws are really tough to bend. When you get into these big one-piece designs, they're a little bit easier to bend and they're not quite as strong, but we really thought that with a shorter throat depth and a 3-piece design, we could achieve a tension that just hadn't been seen before. So why don't you come into the bench here? I'm gonna show you some of the finer details of this, how to change the blade holders, and then I'll give you some tips and tricks on how to use both style of blades. For fret and coping saw blades, there are a million styles and options. These are the Olson blades, which I think are kind of industry standard. I just went by Home Depot and picked up, you can get metal cutting and different tooth counts and different widths and all those kind of things. And of course, you can buy, these are diamond blades. They're measured in like 1, 3, and 5, but you can cut them to length and use them to put in your saw. When changing out these blade holders, it's very, very simple to do. You simply just loosen the handle here. Same thing with this side. And you can just keep going and it'll pop out just like that. Same thing over here, you just keep loosening and pull it out. And then when you want to insert the blade holder, whether you choose the wireframe or the hook style, you can put in here. And you don't even have to worry about orientation when you're doing this, because I'm going to show you here in 1 second how easy it is to change the orientation of the blade. Now I'm going to put it in there with the teeth facing the handle, because I'm a Japanese guy. I like to pull on the pull stroke. One thing you definitely need to know is the handle should be tightened all the way before you do tension. So tighten that all the way up, and then you can adjust your tension here. With these hook style blades, I like to just go all the way with it, because that just becomes incredibly tight and easy to tension. But when you're adjusting the blade, so listen to that sing. It's very, very simple. We have these little windows here where you can see the positive detents. There's 8 of them, so every 45 degrees, you just loosen these thumb wheels here, and then the blade freely rotates. It's actually really cool. I'll show you here in a minute. If you want a free cut, you don't even have to tighten those down. So if you need to do really tight circles, you could leave this loose and just. But the reason you would change the direction of your blade is when you need to reach the middle of a board. So if I wanted to go 45 degrees, you look through these windows here and you can see it's in the 90-degree position. So I'm going to rotate one more there and tighten these down. And as long as you can see the positive detent in the view window there, you know you're on a positive stop. So you can see the blade is at 45 degrees, which would allow you to clear waste anywhere on the inside of a board. Now with these wire style blades, if you're cutting metal or doing jewelry, that kind of thing, you can just cut it to length. I would do about a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch longer than the wheels here, and you can just use a pair of wire cutters and cut them to length just like that and put it in there. But if you are buying the pre-cut fret saw blades like this, it's very simple. You just loosen these. The fret saw blades that we include with this are the 5-inch ones, the smaller ones, so you need to not sink the blade holders all the way in before you start trying to attach them. So I like to leave them loose, and then you just simply put it in there. Again, you don't need to worry about the orientation when you put it in, because it's so easy to adjust. So I'm just going to grab onto that with that. Same thing over here. You just kind of bend it, slide it in there, tighten that thumb wheel like that, and then you can adjust the tension. Now you can really crank on these things because they're out away from the saw. It's really easy to tighten down. And then as far as tightening goes, you can listen to that thing sing. That is unbelievable. Then just ensuring that my tension is correct, I can loosen those thumb wheels and ensure that the blade is right where I want it to be with the view windows open there. Little tip on when you're installing the fret saw blades, because they're shorter, you want to tighten the handle all the way first before you tighten or stick the blade in. This side of the blade holder is going to come out a lot more when you loosen it. So you can loosen and then push this, that's going to push the blade holder. And then when you insert it, you want to try and even the space on the outside of the teeth. There's a smooth area that's going to go in the attachment mechanism, and you just sort of got to wiggle it in there till you find the flat spot, which we did to ensure that the blade could be held really, really tight. And then you're going to tighten it down and tension only on this side, and that's going to save you a lot of frustration because these are shorter blades. It's going to be a lot harder to change them than the hook style blades. So with the blades properly installed, let me show you some cool techniques. I'll show you how to cope some molding, which I don't know if you furniture builders have done any finish carpentry, but it's a great technique. And on every job site, every finish carpenter is going, do you even cope, bro? Do you even cope, bro? So I'll show you how to do that. We'll cut some metal, we'll cut some really tight circles and do some fun stuff. First, I'm gonna show you some tips and tricks if you're cutting joinery, dovetails, clearing out waste, that kind of thing. Then we'll get into some molding and some metal. But first we gotta pretend we're cutting some dovetails here. So I'm gonna show you what it's like to cut out a small area with a fret saw blade and a large area with the coping saw blade. And I know you're gonna ask, this is from a good friend of mine, Bent Rivers on Instagram, handmade marking knife using a hawk blade, beautiful knife. I'll link them down below. Let's cut some dovetails. All right, so the first difference between a coping saw blade and a fret saw blade is a fret saw can fit into a Japanese curve and can do much, much tighter curves. So I have this set up 90 degrees, which means it is parallel with the frame of the saw. And I'm gonna set up my coping saw blade at 45 degrees so that I can show you what it's like to go to the inside of a very wide board. So I'm going to line up those detents in the view window, and there we go. We're set up at 45 degrees. So a coping saw blade is so great for removing a ton of material. You can't fit into the kerf of a Japanese saw. You can with a Western saw, but still, to be able to make a turn, you have to be moving with a saw. You can't just stick it all the way in a kerf and turn. So it still wouldn't fit all the way down in a Western saw. But what I like to do is I'll just start at the end here and I'll kind of shoot for the bottom and a slow turn to end up being just above your line. And you'll see when I'm just above my line, I kind of think of this saw blade as the horizon, and I want it to be following the horizon, so I'll keep my line in mind. But you also need to be thinking about whether you're plumb. Would that be plumb? I don't know. Correct me in the comments. But front to back, you also need to be square. And I think that almost all people typically tend to angle this way. So sometimes it's good to peek over on the other side and see how you're doing. But we're gonna go that way, and then we'll come back and clear it out the other way. And then when you get to your end of your dovetail, you don't want to be pressing as hard as you've been pressing over here, because when it gets through, you don't want to damage what would be your tail over here. So when I get to the end, you hear it start to change like that. Sometimes you can pop them out. And then I'm going to go the other way, but because my blade is set at 45, this is how easy it is to change. I'm just going to loosen these. We're going to go 2 detents, or actually we'll go 1 and do 90 degrees. Tighten those back up. And then I'm just going to go the other way. If you haven't done this before, it probably is easier to flip your board around. And this is what it's like to pop them. Boop, just like that. Now with a fret saw, you can go all the way down to your corner here, so you want to be careful that you don't get below your line, but I'm going to stick it in. I've got it set at 90 degrees. So again, I'm going to look for my whole saw to be the horizon. Again, thinking about the back and the front. If you're down lower here, so when I turn, watch how I do this here. I can't turn or I'll snap my blade, so I'm just gonna go whoop, just like that. Boom, popped out, good to go. And that's how you do that. And then you would clear out the rest of that waste with a chisel. Let's talk about coping some molding. Okay, so when you're coping molding, first and foremost, you're not shooting for the same level of tolerance that we use in building furniture. In construction, you're gonna come back with caulking and fill nail holes. And the reason you do this is nobody's wall is 90 degrees. So if you try to cut this at 45 and 45 and mate them together, it's just not gonna look good, because you're gonna probably have a huge gap one way or the other. It's gonna require a lot of filling to make it look good. So cut these at a 45 already, because that is what allows you to be able to see this line. And I have 2 pieces of trim here. One is much more complicated than the other, and that's just to kind of show you the difference between using a coping saw or a fret saw to do this. All right, it's been a while since I've done this, probably a decade, but the trick is you want to angle your saw back. So we've cut 45 here, but we're actually aiming the other way now with our saw. A lot of times guys will do this in the field, just kind of holding it by hand, but you really want to get as close to that painted line as possible. And you just want to keep moving. It's when you try and turn without cutting that you start to get into trouble here. And a lot of times guys will come back and cut something like this, the straight part with their saw, but I'm just gonna clear this material here. You really wanna let the saw do the work. You don't wanna be pushing too hard. You let the teeth do the cutting, and it will advance along as it clears out that material, very much like a bandsaw. Boom, just like that. And now this one we're gonna do with the fret saw because it has a lot more turns. We also are not gonna be able to get to the end, so we'll have to change our blade to 45 degrees here. But there's no harm when you're doing this in taking a shortcut and then coming back for removing the material. So here I'm skipping this corner. Oh boy, it has been a while, huh? Whew, not too ugly. All right, so this is where we're gonna have to turn the saw 45 degrees. Easy to do mid-cut. I don't know if I said it when I was doing the dovetails, but don't touch the saw blade when you've been cutting. It gets real hot. Just like that. All right, let's see how we did here. So then if you got your 90 degree, you'd be meeting in the corner, but just like this, boom. That's how you cope some molding. It looks like I got a little bit too wide over there, but all in all, that's just fine for caulking and painting. Same with the other one here. Boom, just like that. God, it's been 10 years, but not too ugly. Not my proudest coping, but it'd get the job done. One of the cool things about these saws is they are so strong, but they're also so delicate, and you can do the most complex curves with it. And that is because of this free motion that we've created. It is so easy to change the angle of the blade that you can actually leave these undone and do what's called free cutting. Like, check that out. Even the other really good saw on the market, it's really, really hard to change it. If you want to change the angle, you have to loosen the tension. Ours you can do in tension, and then you have to turn this. And this is not something I can do by hand, but on ours, not only can you easily change the degrees, but you can free cut. So check this out. This is one of my favorite things. So it kind of becomes like a scroll saw, which is really so cool. Check that out. Like, there's not another saw on the market that could do that. So another thing that's cool about these, you can get metal cutting blades. And honestly, most woodworking blades will cut aluminum and brass, but you can actually buy hacksaw blades for these, or just use a really high tooth count if you're cutting aluminum brass. But for the fret saw, you can get this diamond wire cutting, which means you can do really complex shapes, or, you know, cut metal into different sizes. And all you need to do is just cut it to length and tension it up like normal. Pretty cool. I don't know how often you'd use it, but it's nice to know it's there. Obviously, brass comes a lot in woodworking if you're doing like plugs for screw holes that you want to make look super nice. You can then finish these up at the drill press and polish them up. And of course, being able to cut crazy shapes in aluminum never hurts, right? If you need to fit it to something, or maybe you're making some jewelry or doing a wooden ring, I don't know. But that's pretty neat. Let me tell you about the Presale. So that's the coping saw. Please don't make fun of my coping abilities. I wasn't even that good at it 10 years ago when I used to fill in and do it sometimes. So I think we've solved a lot of the problems with the coping saw in general. We've added some tons of usability features. The fact that we've been able to combine a fret saw and a coping saw into one is an incredible feat, and we did it in a stronger aluminum frame that can get as good of tension, if not better, than any saw on the market. So I think you're really gonna enjoy it. Presale, first batch drops in like 1 to 2 weeks, and we'll get those shipped out right away. Second batch will be here in 6 to 7 weeks. In the box, you'll get both style of blade attachments, so you get the wire style and the hook style. You'll get a wrench for putting the handle on either side, push or pull stroke, and you'll get a couple extra blades, which would be a coping saw and a wire saw blade, as well as the one mounted in it, which is the coping saw blade. So you get 3 blades. Of course, it comes in this beautiful case, and I think you're really gonna like it. And I couldn't be more excited to work on this and bring it to you. I love developing tools. It has become such a passion of mine, and brings me such great joy to know that something that we created is in your shop and you're finding joy from it too. As always, this channel is not sponsored and is supported by people like you visiting KM Tools and checking out all the great tools we have over there that we've developed or work with people to bring to market. As always, stay safe in the shop, guys. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.